She said yes. And the moment she did, something in the room changed, not loudly, not with any drama the eye could catch. Just a shift. The kind you feel in your sternum before your mind catches up. She said yes to staying. That was all. That was everything. The hospital corridor outside room 4B had emptied fast, the way spaces empty when someone with quiet authority decides they should. 4 men in dark suits. A lawyer holding a phone like it was a weapon. An administrator whose voice had climbed 3 registers in the span of 2 minutes, saying words like liability and protocol, and this is highly irregular. Nurse Akua Mensah-Boateng stood at the door of room 4B and did not move. She was not loud about it. She did not argue. She simply stood there, arms folded, badge forward, the particular stillness of a woman who has decided that her body is the boundary, and said, "He is not stable. Nobody enters or removes him until I say so." The administrator looked at the men in suits. The men in suits looked at each other. And somewhere in that exchange of looks lived a conversation nobody spoke aloud, one that involved names and weight and the specific arithmetic of who in this room could afford consequences. Akua was not part of that arithmetic. And she knew it. She stayed anyway. What nobody in that corridor understood, what she herself had not yet fully named, was that this was not simply professional instinct. Nurses develop instinct the way bone develops density. Slowly, under pressure, over years. She had learned to read a room the way her mother had taught her to read weather, not from instruments, but from the quality of the air. And the air around this man said, someone brought him here deliberately. Not dumped. Not abandoned. Brought. Positioned. The 4-line had been started before arrival, clean insertion, professional angle. His clothing was plain but the fabric was not. And the single item in his jacket pocket, which she had catalogued during initial assessment and said nothing about, was not a wallet or a phone. It was a folded document. Unsigned. In Korean and English both. She had read 4 lines before folding it back exactly as she found it. 4 lines were enough. He opened his eyes at 11:47 p.m. He did not look confused, the way patients usually do, that blurred, grasping quality of someone returning from unconsciousness. He looked at the ceiling once. Then he looked directly at her. As if he had always known she would be the one standing there. As if, in some version of this night he had already lived through, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. He said nothing. She said nothing. Outside, the men in suits were still waiting. Inside, something had already begun, quiet, irreversible, and nowhere near as simple as either of them would later pretend. Stay with this story. Because the reason she refused to leave that room, you think you already know it. You don't. By morning, she knew 3 things. His name was Han Do-hyun. He was Korean. And the men who had arrived with lawyers and silence were not security, they were structure. The kind of structure that doesn't protect a person so much as it contains them. She knew one more thing she had not told anyone. The document in his jacket, the 4 lines she had read and refolded, referenced a facility by registration number. She had recognized that number without meaning to. It was the registration number of Nkrumah Memorial Hospital. The building she was standing in. The place her mother had died 9 years ago when it was still public, still free, still hers. She had said nothing. She had clocked back in and finished her shift. Han Do-hyun was quiet in the particular way of men who have learned that silence is a form of surveillance. He watched her chart his vitals with the focused attention of someone memorizing a route, not for admiration, but for navigation. When the room finally emptied, he said, in English so clean it had no accent to hold on to, "You read it?" Not a question. She did not look up from the chart. Read what? Whatever was in my pocket. A pause. Measured. Patients are assessed on arrival. That includes personal effects. 4 lines, he said. You folded it back at exactly the original crease. Most people don't notice the crease. She looked at him then. Directly. The way she looked at things she was deciding whether to trust. You should rest, she said. Your pressure is still unstable. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Not warmth, not threat. Recognition. The unsettling kind. The kind that suggests the person looking at you has been expecting you specifically. "What is your name?" he asked. "It's on my badge." "Akua," he said, and the way he said it, without stumbling, without the slight hesitation most people needed, told her he had not read it just now. He already knew it. Outside, in the administrative office 2 floors down, a phone call was being made to a number registered to a shell company in Singapore. The voice on the receiving end asked one question: "Is she the one?" The answer came back in 3 seconds. "Yes." Akua finished her notes, clipped the chart, walked to the door. She did not know yet that her father's name was in a ledger inside Han Do-hyun's encrypted files. She did not know that she had not found this man by accident. She did not know that someone had made sure their paths would cross. But somewhere underneath all she did not yet know, her body already did. He was discharged on a Thursday. He came back on a Friday. No appointment. No medical reason. He walked through the front entrance of Nkrumah Memorial at 9 a.m. carrying nothing except the particular stillness of a man who has already decided what he is going to do and is no longer negotiating with himself about it. Akua saw him from the nurse's station before he saw her. She had 1 second, maybe 2, where she could have turned, taken the corridor left, disappeared into the functional invisibility that hospital staff learn to wear. She did not take it. She stood her ground. The way she always did. He told her about the donation quietly, without ceremony. A private foundation. A specific allocation to Nkrumah Memorial's public access fund. No Han Dynasty branding. No press. She would not have found it at all if one of the administrative staff hadn't mentioned, offhandedly, that an anonymous transfer had cleared that morning, larger than anything the hospital had received in 4 years. She found him in the parking lot. "What is this?" she said, holding the printed transfer confirmation. He looked at it briefly. "A hospital that still accepts patients who cannot pay. It should stay that way." "Why?" The pause before his answer was not hesitation. It was selection, the way a careful man moves through a room, choosing where to place his weight. "Because some things should not be bought," he said. "And someone should have said that before they were." She studied him the way she studied charts, looking for the thing underneath the obvious reading. People who give money like this, anonymously, specifically, are either guilty or afraid. "Which are you?" He held her gaze without flinching. "Both." That evening, alone in her apartment, Akua opened the folder she had been quietly building for 3 months. Hospital acquisition records. Shell company structures. A financial trail that kept narrowing toward a single origin point she hadn't named yet. Not because she couldn't see it, but because naming it would make it real. She cross-referenced the Foundation's routing signature against her existing research. The result loaded in 11 seconds. Yeui Capital Partners. She sat very still for a long time. Then she opened a second document, one she had never shown anyone, and added a single line at the bottom. He already knows. She did not confront him that night. Or the next. She sat with what she knew the way she had learned to sit with difficult diagnoses, not rushing toward the conclusion, but letting the full shape of it form before she moved. Reacting too early was how people made mistakes. And Akua Mensah-Boateng had spent her entire adult life making very few mistakes. She made one now. She agreed to meet him again. He proposed it professionally, a consultation, his word, on community health infrastructure across West Africa. He needed, he said, someone with ground-level institutional knowledge. Someone whose credibility was unimpeachable. She knew what he was doing. She went anyway. They met at a quiet restaurant near the waterfront, late afternoon, when the light came through the windows at an angle that made everything look more honest than it was. He ordered coffee. She ordered nothing. He spoke carefully about reinvestment structures, about the gap between corporate rehabilitation language and actual community impact. At one point he said, without being asked, without any visible reason, the decisions that shaped these communities were made by men who believed efficiency mattered more than history. I am not those men. But I benefited from what they built. She said, "Why are you telling me that?" "Because you already know it," he said. "And I would rather be the one who says it." What he did not say, What he carefully, deliberately did not say, was the name. 2 floors below the restaurant, in a car she had not noticed, a man named Director Yoon Chirin's appointed investigator was photographing their meeting through a long lens. The photographs would reach Seoul within the hour. And in Seoul, inside an encrypted file that 3 people in the world could access, a name sat waiting, patient, silent, load-bearing. Akua Mensah-Boateng. Local facilitator. Accra Municipal Access. Confirmed. Compensated. Erased. Her father's name. In Han Do-hyun's file. Underneath it, in smaller text, a note added 7 years later in Do-hyun's own hand. Daughter, Akua. Current location. Nkrumah Memorial Hospital, Accra. Proximity. Confirmed. She walked home alone that evening believing she was the one with leverage. She did not yet know she was already inside someone else's architecture. And the architect had known her name before she ever knew his. He asked her to attend a hospital board meeting. Not dinner. Not anything that required a different name for what it was. A board meeting, legitimate, documented, held inside the glass conference room of a private health investment firm on the 14th floor of a building that had, 3 years ago, been publicly funded. She noticed that. She noticed everything. The meeting was in English, then Korean, then English again, that particular bilingual rhythm of rooms where power speaks one language and accountability speaks another. Akua sat at the far end of the table and said very little. She was there, Do-hyun had told her, as a community health consultant. Her presence would signal good faith to the board. She understood, without being told, that her presence was also a performance. That her face, her specific face, her credentials, her origin, was doing work that his words alone could not do. She let it. For now. Afterward, in the corridor outside the conference room, while his team gathered papers and exchanged quiet Korean she was not meant to follow, Do-hyun stood beside her at the window overlooking the city and said nothing for almost 2 minutes. Then, you research like someone who is afraid of missing something important. I am, she said. Why? She watched the traffic 14 floors below. Because in my experience, the important things are always hidden underneath the obvious things. And by the time most people look underneath, it's too late. He was quiet. Then, my father taught me that power was controlling what people see. A pause. It took me a long time to understand that the people who actually have power control what they are willing to feel. She turned to look at him. That was not a strategic statement. She knew the difference, had spent her entire career learning the difference. That was a man saying something true and surprising himself by saying it. She did not know what to do with that. So she looked back at the window. That night, 3,000 miles away in Seoul, a journalist received an anonymous email. Attached were 4 documents. 2 were financial records. 1 was a photograph. The last was a single paragraph, sourced, attributed, and ready to run. The subject line read, Han Dynasty Group, West Africa Acquisition Cover-Up. Is this woman part of it? Her photograph was the one attached. You feel it, don't you, that moment when someone starts to see through the walls they built? This channel exists for stories like this one. Stories about trust crossing every border it was told it couldn't. If you're still here, subscribe. Because the next chapter is where everything they've been hiding starts to cost them both. She found out about the article at 6 a.m. A colleague sent it without comment, just a link and a single punctuation mark. A question she didn't need to ask. Akua read it once, then again, then set her phone face down on the kitchen table and sat with her hands flat on the surface the way her mother had taught her to sit when something was trying to make her panic. Feel the table, her mother used to say. It doesn't move. You don't move. She called Do-hyun. He answered before the second ring. Which meant he already knew. If you were behind this, she started. I was not. His voice was controlled in the way that things are controlled when the effort of controlling them is visible underneath. The source is internal. Someone in my circle who believed they were protecting the family. By destroying me. Silence. Yes, he said. By destroying you. This was the cultural fracture neither of them had language for yet. In the world Do-hyun had been raised inside, loyalty did not announce itself. It acted, preemptively, protectively, without waiting to be asked. The man who had leaked that article had not done it out of malice toward Akua specifically. He had done it because she was a variable. And in the architecture of unspoken obligation that governed everything Do-hyun had ever inherited, variables near the center of power were managed. Quietly. Finally. Akua came from a different architecture entirely. One where silence about harm was itself a harm. Where the person protected without their knowledge was still a person violated. She could not explain this to him in a way his framework would immediately receive. He could not explain his world's logic in a way that wouldn't sound, to her, like justification. So they stood on either side of that gap, both of them right, both of them insufficient, and made the only decision available. "I want to see the source," she said. "I'll handle it," he said. "That," she said quietly, "is exactly what I'm afraid of." The leak ran on a Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, Akua had received 43 messages, lost 2 professional references, and been contacted by a parliamentary subcommittee investigating foreign healthcare acquisitions in West Africa, not as a suspect, but as a witness. She accepted the invitation without telling Do-hyun. That was the moment the power shifted. Not dramatically. Not with any announcement. But when Do-hyun's legal team discovered, through channels that were supposed to catch everything, that Akua Mensah-Boateng had been formally contacted by a governmental body with subpoena authority, the atmosphere inside Han Dynasty Group's Accra operation changed in a way that had no Korean word precise enough to describe it. She was no longer a variable near the center. She was the center. Do-hyun called her that evening. She let it ring twice before answering, not out of games, but because she needed 2 rings to decide what version of herself was going to pick up the phone. She chose the honest one. "You know about the subcommittee," she said. "Yes." "Then you know what my testimony could do." A pause that had weight in it. "Yes." "Good," she said. "Then we understand each other." 3 floors above Do-hyun's temporary Accra office, Director Yoon Chirin was on a call with 2 Han Dynasty board members who had, until 72 hours ago, been loyalists. Her voice was level. Her argument was clean. Her conclusion was simple. Do-hyun had allowed an outside woman, an African woman with active government access, to become structurally embedded in a crisis involving the family's most sensitive acquisitions. In the language of the Korean underworld, there was a specific term for this kind of exposure. It translated, roughly, as a door left open by someone who forgot what doors are for. The 2 board members listened. Said nothing aloud. But they stopped taking Do-hyun's calls after midnight. He noticed. He said nothing to Akua. He told himself it was to protect her. He was only half lying. The betrayal had a name. It always did. Park Sung-jin. 44 years old. 22 years inside the Han family structure. The man who had stood outside Do-hyun's hospital room the morning after the collapse, who had run the background report on Akua without being asked twice, who had never, not once in 2 decades, acted without authorization. Except once. Do-hyun found out on a Thursday at 6 a.m., same time Akua had found out about the original leak, though he didn't know that symmetry yet. His intelligence contact sent a single file. No message. No framing. Just the file. Inside it, the routing trail of the leaked document. The timestamp. The device. The network signature. Park Sung-jin's personal encrypted line. Do-hyun read it 3 times. Not because he didn't understand it. Because he was giving himself 3 chances to find a different conclusion. There was none. He sat with it for 11 minutes. Then he called Akua. She answered immediately. "You know," she said, not a question, the same way he had spoken to her about the document in his jacket. They had learned each other's rhythms without meaning to. That was its own kind of danger. "Yes," he said. "How long has he been with your family?" 22 years. Silence. She absorbed that the way she absorbed difficult information. Fully, without flinching, without pretending it was smaller than it was. He did it because he thought he was protecting you. "Yes." "That doesn't make me less destroyed." "No," he said. "It doesn't." What happened next cost Do-hyun something he had never spent before. He terminated Park Sung-jin publicly. Not quietly, not the clean, internal disappearance that the Han family had always used to manage its fractures. He issued the correction through official Han Dynasty group channels. He exposed the leak himself, in his own name. He made the internal wound visible to every eye that was already watching. In the Korean corporate underworld, what he did had a specific gravity. You did not sacrifice a 22-year loyalty publicly for an outsider. You did not open the family's internal structure to outside confirmation. The hierarchy of obligation, the architecture his father had spent a lifetime building, did not bend for individuals. It especially did not bend for women who were not family, who were not Korean, who held government subpoena access and hadn't yet decided how to use it. He bent it anyway. Akua found out through the news alert like everyone else. She read the statement twice. Then she called him. "You didn't have to do it publicly," she said. "Yes, I did," he said. "Why?" The pause before his answer was the longest he had ever taken with her. "Because you deserved a defense that cost me something. Anything less would have been management, not accountability." She was quiet for a long time. Outside her window, Accra was moving through its evening. Loud, living, completely indifferent to the fact that something between two people who had no clean word for what they were had just shifted into territory neither of them had a map for. "Yoon Chae-rin has something," Akua said finally. "Something bigger than the leak. I don't know what it is yet. But I've seen the pattern before, the way she's been moving, the board members going quiet, the timing. A breath. She's waiting for the right moment to use it." "Against me," he said. "Against both of us," she said. "Whatever she has, it connects us. That's why she's waiting. One strike. Two targets." Silence. Then Do-hyun said something he had never said to anyone in 20 years of operating inside a world built on unspoken obligation. "Tell me what you need." She told him. And just like that, not with romance, not with declaration, but with the specific gravity of two people who have decided that surviving together is more honest than pretending they can survive apart, the alliance formed. Neither of them trusted it fully. Both of them needed it completely. The parliamentary hearing was held in a building that smelled like colonial architecture and fresh paint, the particular combination of old power being hastily redecorated for modern accountability. Akua sat in the third row of the public gallery. Not testifying today. Observing. She had been called as a formal witness for the following week, and she had come early the way surgeons scrub in early, not out of anxiety, but out of respect for what was about to be operated on. Do-hyun was not present. His legal team occupied 2 seats near the back. They did not acknowledge her. She did not acknowledge them. The subcommittee was examining 6 hospital acquisitions across West Africa. The lead investigator was a Ghanaian woman named Dr. Abina Frimpong. 50s, precise, the kind of tired that comes not from age but from decades of watching important things be buried beneath procedural language. She asked her questions without theatre. She wanted documents, not drama. Akua respected that completely. The first 2 hours were technical. Financial structures. Regulatory frameworks. The language of systems doing what systems do, which is protect themselves while appearing to protect people. Then Dr. Frimpong held up a document. "Can the committee confirm," she said, "that the acquisition authorization for Nkrumah Memorial Hospital's restructuring was signed by a representative of Yaoi Capital Partners, and that the local facilitation contact listed on this document is one Akua Mensah-Boateng, deceased, formerly of the Accra Municipal Planning Office?" The room continued at its normal pace. Akua stopped breathing for 4 seconds. She had known her father's name was in the ledger. Do-hyun had told her. She had held that truth, turned it over, made a kind of fractured peace with it. She had not known it was in the parliamentary record. She had not known it was about to be read aloud, in a government hearing, in the city where she worked, in a building 12 minutes from the hospital that bore the consequences of everything that name had helped enable. She stood up quietly. Walked out of the gallery. Found a bathroom on the 2nd floor. Stood at the sink with the water running and looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. Her mother's face looked back. Her father's eyes. Two people who had loved her inside a world that had been quietly sold around them. Her phone lit up at the same moment in 3 separate notifications. The first was a news alert: key witness in hospital acquisition hearing, daughter of named facilitator. Conflict of interest. The second was a message from an unknown number: walk away from the testimony. This is the only time we ask politely. The third was from Do-hyun. 4 words. I'm outside. Come out. She looked at the mirror one more time. Then she turned off the tap, straightened her badge, and walked toward the exit. Not because he was waiting, but because she had never once in her life walked away from the thing she came to face. But the unknown number's message stayed open on her screen. And the sender, when she checked the metadata 3 hours later, traced back to a device registered inside Han Dynasty Group's Seoul headquarters. Not Do-hyun's device. Yoon Chae-rin's. He was standing by a black car at the side entrance. No team. No lawyer. Just him, in a plain dark jacket, looking like a man who had made a decision before he fully understood what it would cost. She walked past him. Not out of cruelty. Out of the specific self-preservation of a woman who knows that if she stops moving, she will feel everything at once, and she cannot afford that. Not here. Not yet. He fell into step beside her without being invited. That was how they walked for half a block, side by side, no touching, no speaking, the Accra evening loud and indifferent around them. Then she said, the threat came from Yoon Chae-rin's device. I know, he said. She stopped walking. You knew she would do this. I knew she was capable of it. He said it without defense. I underestimated her timeline. That is not the same as not knowing. No, he said. It isn't. You see why this matters now, don't you? In a world that often misunderstands interracial and cross-cultural love, stories like this give it a voice. If you've ever felt judged for who you love, if you've ever chosen someone the world didn't understand, then this channel was built for you. And walking away without subscribing feels like leaving their story, and this community, unfinished. Stay. Subscribe. Let's keep telling stories that dare to cross borders. The silence between them had texture now. It was not the silence of 2 people with nothing to say. It was the silence of 2 people with too much, stacked in the wrong order, in languages that didn't fully translate. My father protected me, she said finally. The only way he knew how. By doing something he shouldn't have. Do-hyun was very still. Yes. Your family's people used that against him. Yes. And you have been carrying his name in your files for 7 years. Not a question. While I carried his memory in mine. He had no answer that was also an excuse. He did not offer one. She looked at him, fully, the way she rarely let herself look at things that cost her something to see. I need 3 days, she said. Away from you. Away from all of it. He nodded once. All right. She walked away. He stood on that pavement and watched her go and did not follow, because following would have been, in his world, a statement of ownership. And she was the one person in his life he refused to own. Even when letting her walk away felt like losing something he hadn't known he was holding. The Business Alliance meeting was held in a private room at the Accra Marriott, neutral ground, which meant it belonged to no one and therefore everyone was watching it carefully. Do-hyun had requested her presence. Professionally framed, as always. A community health consultant whose credibility would signal good faith to the 3 West African investment partners seated across the table. She came. She Saturday. She listened. And 40 minutes into the meeting, she understood something that changed the temperature of everything. The investment partners were not considering a new deal. They were evaluating whether to exit an existing one. Quietly, cleanly, with minimum public disruption. The parliamentary hearing had made them nervous. Yoon Chae-rin's internal challenge had made it worse. And the media narrative, Han Dynasty's African rehabilitation, genuine reform or damage control, had introduced a doubt that money alone couldn't resolve. What they needed was not a financial restructure. They needed a face they could trust. A voice that hadn't been purchased. They needed Akua. Do-hyun knew it. The partners knew it. And sitting at that table, watching 3 powerful men look past Do-hyun toward her, Akua understood, with cold clarity, exactly how much leverage she was carrying. After the meeting, in the corridor, Do-hyun said quietly, "I should have told you that's what this was." "Yes," she said. "You should have. Would you have come?" She considered it honestly. "I don't know." He nodded. That was the thing about him she had never expected. He accepted honest uncertainty without trying to resolve it into something more comfortable. "They'll pull out without you," he said. "The alliance collapses. The hospital restoration funding goes with it." "I know," she said. 3 hospitals. Fully restored. That funding disappears. "I know what's at stake." Her voice was steady. "Do you know what you're asking me to be?" He looked at her. Really looked. The way he rarely allowed himself to look at anything he couldn't afford to want. "Yes," he said quietly. "I'm asking you to be the reason this works. And I'm aware that's not fair." "It's not," she said. She picked up her bag. "I'll give you my answer tomorrow," she said. "And Do-hyun, whatever I decide, it will be mine. Not yours. Not theirs. Mine." She walked out. He stood in that corridor and felt something crack open in the architecture of everything he had built, not catastrophically, but enough. Enough to let something in that had no name in the language his father taught him. She gave him her answer at 7 a.m. By phone. 2 sentences. "I'll support the alliance. On my terms, fully documented, with complete editorial independence on the outcome. You don't get to frame what I say." He agreed without negotiation. That should have felt like victory. It felt like standing at the edge of something she couldn't see the bottom of. She was at the nurse's station when the recording arrived. No message. No name. Just an audio file, 43 seconds long, sent from an anonymous number that she already knew, from the metadata, traced back to Park Sung-jin. She put her earphones in. Pressed play. Her father's voice filled the left and right channels equally. "I did what you asked. The introductions are done. The signatures, I handled it. Now leave my daughter out of it. Whatever comes next, she doesn't know. She cannot know. Do you understand me? She is not part of this." A pause. Then a voice she didn't recognize, Korean accented English, calm and final. "Of course. You have our word." The recording ended. Akua sat completely still for a long time. The nurse's station moved around her, the ordinary, relentless motion of a hospital doing what hospitals do. Someone called her name twice before she heard it. She took the earphones out. Her father had not been naive. He had not been simply compromised. He had been a man standing between his family's survival and a door he knew he shouldn't open, and he had opened it anyway, and then spent whatever credibility he had left trying to make sure the door closed before it reached her. He had failed. But he had tried. Those were 2 different things. She was only now learning to hold them both at once. She forwarded the recording to Do-hyun with no message. He called within 4 minutes. She answered. Neither of them spoke for almost a full minute, just the sound of 2 people on either end of a line, holding something too heavy and too true for immediate words. Then she said, "He was protecting me." "Yes," Do-hyun said. "From your family's people." "Yes." She closed her eyes. "I'm going to finish this. The testimony. The alliance. The full story. Published, attributed, every name included. A breath. Including mine. Silence. Then, if you publish everything, my position on the board becomes indefensible." "I know," she said. "Yoon Chae-rin wins." "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe the board sees a man who chose accountability over survival and decides that's exactly who they need going forward." A pause. "Either way, I cannot protect you by being silent. My father tried that. I watched what it cost him." The line was quiet for a long time. "Publish it," he said finally. "1 word at a time. Like each one was a door he was choosing to open. Publish all of it." The board vote was scheduled for a Thursday. Do-hyun spent the 3 days before it the way he spent every difficult thing, alone, in advance, without performance. He met individually with each board member. Not in conference rooms. In the places people actually think, a quiet lunch, a walk, a car ride to nowhere specific. He did not deploy leverage. He did not make threats dressed in careful language. He made arguments about long-term institutional survival, about the cost of the old architecture in a world where transparency was no longer optional, about what Han Dynasty Group became if it continued to treat accountability as weakness. He was, without fully realizing it, arguing in Akua's voice. The vote was 4-3. Yoon Chae-rin accepted the outcome with the controlled grace of a woman already planning the next move. She shook hands. She smiled at the appropriate moments. She left the boardroom without looking at Do-hyun directly, which told him more than any expression would have. She was not finished. She was repositioning. Park Sung-jin's message arrived that evening. Terminated, exiled from the only structure he had ever belonged to, operating now from the specific recklessness of a loyal man with nothing left to protect, he sent 3 words to Do-hyun's private number. "You argued differently." Do-hyun read it once. Folded his phone into his jacket pocket. Stood at the window of his hotel room looking out at Accra. The lights, the movement, the city that had no investment in who he was or what he was fighting to become. He thought about Akua. Not romantically. Not strategically. Just, the particular way she moved through spaces that were designed to diminish her, with a steadiness that had nothing to do with not feeling the pressure. She felt it. He had watched her feel it. She moved through it anyway. He had spent 41 years learning to suppress what he felt. She had spent her whole life learning to carry it without letting it stop her. He was only now understanding which one of them was actually stronger. The story ran on a Friday. Every name, every document, every acquisition structure laid open in language that was precise without being cruel, the particular editorial restraint of a writer who understood that the facts, properly arranged, required no embellishment. Her father's name was in it. Her own proximity, fully disclosed. Do-hyun's authorization signatures. Yoon Chae-rin's facilitation role. The communities affected, named individually, not as statistics but as places. Streets. Families. A hospital where a woman named Akua Mensah had arrived unable to pay and been turned away and died 3 weeks later of something entirely treatable. Akua's mother. Named. Finally. In print. Do-hyun read the story in Seoul. He had returned 2 weeks prior. The geographic distance a mutual, unspoken decision. Neither of them had named it a goodbye. Neither of them had named it anything. He read it twice. Then he opened his laptop and began drafting the restructuring commitment for the final 2 hospital acquisitions. Full public restoration, documented, attributable, no foundation routing, no third-party distance. Han Dynasty Group's name on it directly. His legal team sent 17 objections within the hour. He approved the commitment anyway. The language of the press release was not his. Not exactly. It carried the rhythm of someone else's thinking. The moral architecture of a woman who had taught him, without ever intending to, that accountability was not the same as weakness. That naming a harm was not the same as performing guilt. That the difference between the two was everything. He did not put her name in the press release. But anyone who had read her work would recognize her in every line. 6 weeks passed. He sent one message. "My mother asked about you. I didn't know what to tell her." She read it at the nurse's station. Read it again on her break. Sat with it the way she sat with difficult things, fully, without rushing toward resolution. She did not reply. Not because she had nothing to say. Because what she had to say was not a message. It was something that lived in the space between 2 people who had held leverage over each other, and found, underneath all of it, something neither of them had a clean word for. And some truths, she had learned, are not smaller for being unspoken. They are just, still waiting. She did not go back to the hospital that morning. Instead she went to the parliamentary hearing room, empty now, chairs still arranged in their formal rows, the overhead lights left on for no one. She sat in the same seat she had occupied weeks ago, before everything she thought she understood about herself and him had been quietly, permanently rearranged. She had received the final document at midnight. Not from Park Sung-jin. Not from Yoon Chae-rin. From Do-hyun himself, sent without explanation, without framing, The way he delivered every truth he had finally decided to stop carrying alone. It was his father's original directive. Dated 14 years ago. Before the acquisitions. Before Yaoi Capital. Before any of it. The directive named 2 African facilitators considered ideal for regional access. The second name was her father's. The first name was a woman named Akua Mensah, her mother, listed as a municipal health administrator with community influence worth cultivating. Her mother, who had died in a hospital that could no longer afford to treat her. Her mother, who had been identified, years before her death, as useful. Akua sat with that for a long time. Then she picked up her phone. Opened Do-hyun's last message, still unanswered, still waiting. She typed 3 words. Deleted them. Typed them again. I know everything. She pressed send. His response came in 40 seconds. I know you do. I sent it. If this story touched you, even a little, then you already belong here. Mafia romance, especially interracial and cross-cultural love stories, aren't just drama. They're about trust, sacrifice, and choosing love when it's hardest. Subscribing isn't just supporting a channel. It's supporting stories that show love can survive power, prejudice, and fear. And if you made it to the end, you're not just a viewer anymore. You're part of this story.